Hi and welcome to the new PwC video of our MiFID II series. My name is Stefan Moser and I work in the Austrian office advising our clients in all aspects of regulatory compliance with a special focus on topics of MiFID II for mainly the last 2 years. In today's video we are going to cover the recently published joint EBA and ESMA guidelines regarding the requirement to assess the suitability of members of the management bodies and key function holders. These guidelines have been published at the end of September and will enter into force by the end of June 2018. The rationale and objective of the guidelines is to establish the harmonized criteria for the assessment of the suitability of the members of the management body and the key function holders, and to ensure the sound assessment process as part of the institution's governance arrangements. And as the ongoing suitability of all members of the management body and key function holders is crucial for the proper functioning, consequently institutions are required to assess all the criteria of all these persons. On this slide we have a quick overview of all the relevant sections of the guideline, which we will now have an in-depth look at. Looking at Title 1, that is probably one of the very important topics, and it covers the application of the proportionality principle. The guidelines are, in general, subject to the principle of proportionality, and institutions should take into account their size, internal organization, and the nature, scale, and complexity of their activities when developing and implementing policies and processes set out in these guidelines. It is not only size and internal organization, but also criteria whether an institution is listed or not, the type of authorized activities, the underlying business models, the risk strategy, the type of clients, as well as many other criteria. Significant institutions should even have more sophisticated policies and processes, while in particular the small and less complex institutions may implement the simpler policies and processes. When we look at the scope of the suitability assessments, we have to divide between individual suitability and the collective suitability. The individual suitability ensures that all members of the management body are individually suitable at all times, particularly when the institute is applying for authorization to take up business or when material changes in the composition of the management body occur. That means the appointing of new members of the management or the reappointing if the requirements of the positions have changed. The initial and ongoing assessment of the suitability is in the responsibility of institutions, regardless of activities of competent authorities. The assessment criteria include, but are not limited to, sufficiently good reputation, if the person possesses sufficient knowledge, skills, and experience to perform their duties, if they act with honesty, integrity, and independence of mind, if they effectively oversee and monitor management decision-making, able to effectively assess and challenge the decision, and to commit sufficient time to perform their functions. A reassessment should occur whenever there are concerns regarding the individual or collective suitability, or when there were material impacts on the reputation either of the person, of the management board, or of the institution, or when a review of internal governance arrangements has taken place. Any event that could otherwise materially affect the suitability of the individual persons or the collective board will of course also lead to a reassessment. And whenever a member of the current board takes on additional directorships or new relevant activities, a reassessment should take place as well. So far for the suitability assessment regarding the individual suitability. When we look at collective suitability, institutions have to ensure that the management body collectively possesses adequate knowledge and skills, as well as experience to be able to understand all of the institution's activities, including the risks, particularly, again, when applying for the authorization or when material changes to the composition of the management body occur. But when assessing collective suitability, we also have to assess when members cease to be members of the management body, that the remainder of the management body or the management body incorporating the new member will still have adequate knowledge, skills, and experience. If we look at Title 3 of the guidelines, it defines the notions of the suitability, which are listed in the Article 91, subparagraph 12 of the directive. That means we look at 4 components. The first one is sufficient time commitment of the member of the management board. So the institution has to assess whether or not a member of the management body is able to commit sufficient time for the functions, including understanding the business of the institution, its main risks, and the implications of the business and the risk strategy. They need to be able to fulfill all their duties in periods of particularly increased activity. That could mean, for example, the restructuring or an acquisition period, or maybe also a crisis situation like we witnessed in 2007-2008. Also taking into account that in such periods a higher level of time commitment than in normal periods may be required. What does this mean? Time that needs to be committed should be dependent on, once again, the criteria regarding the proportionality, which means size, nature, scope, and complexity. But it should also keep in mind the member's geographical presence, the travel time required for meetings, the availability of digital tools that could support the meetings, the directorships in other organizations, the numbers of meetings scheduled for the management body, and various other components. What is important is that all institutions record in writing the roles, the duties, and the required capabilities, as well as the expected time commitment required for those positions, plus, in case it's necessary, the time for induction and training of those members. All members of a management body should be made aware of the expected time commitment which is required to fulfill all these duties. The next criteria is the adequate knowledge, skills, and experience of members of the management body. So they have to have an up-to-date understanding of the business of the institutions, including an understanding of those areas for which this individual member is not directly responsible, but is collectively accountable together. That means you have to have a clear understanding of the institution's governance arrangements, the respective roles and responsibilities, and where applicable group structure or possible conflicts of interest. But as well, you have to have a basic understanding of what is generally going on in the institution, even though it does not affect your personal direct responsibility. The assessment of the adequate knowledge, skills, and experience should consider the role and duties of the position and the required capabilities, the knowledge, skills, and the practical and professional experience, plus the knowledge and skills acquired and demonstrated by the professional conduct of the ongoing member of the management body. Those knowledge, skills, and experience especially include information about general banking and financial markets, the legal requirements and the regulatory framework, the strategic planning of the institution, as well as risk management, accounting, and auditing topics. What is also important is that members of the management body in its management function should have gained sufficient practical and professional experience from a managerial position over a sufficiently long period. You can see here that the guideline distinguishes between the management body in its management functions and later on the management body in its supervisory function due to different management body structures all across Europe. In the case of the management function, particular consideration should be given to the nature of the position, the length of services, the scope of competencies, the decision-making powers and responsibilities of the members, but also soft skills like, is the person actually able to challenge decisions that have been issued by someone else? Members of the management body in its supervisory function, though, should be able to provide constructive challenges to the decisions made by the management body in its management function. And this might also be demonstrated by adequate knowledge and skills, relevant academic or administrative positions, or other management, supervision, or control of financial institutions or other firms. The management body should collectively be able to understand the institution's activities in its supervisory functions, and the members of the management body in the supervisory function should also be able to take appropriate decisions considering the business model, the risk appetite, and the strategy and markets in which the institution operates, as this is one of the predominantly roles of the management body in the supervisory function. They should collectively be able to effectively challenge and monitor all the decisions managed by the management body in its management function. All areas of knowledge required for the institution's business activities should be covered by the supervisory body with sufficient expertise among members of the committee. The third and very personal part affects the reputation, honesty, and integrity of the members of the management body. They should be deemed to be of good repute and of honesty and integrity if there are no objective and demonstrable grounds to suggest otherwise, but also consider the impact of cumulative effects of minor incidents, which means if they have been convicted for a major crime, reputation, honesty and integrity will definitely be challenged or at stake. But even getting a lot of minor incidents, minor issues with competent authorities can lead to a reconsideration of the collective view on reputation, honesty and integrity. The factors that should at least be considered in the assessment of the reputation, honesty and integrity are especially convictions or ongoing prosecutions for criminal offense, fraud, tax or financial crimes, and especially, of course, in regard to offenses under the laws governing the banking, financial securities and or insurance activities. Every member of the management board should uphold high standards of integrity and honesty, as well as past and present business performance and financial soundness. All ongoing investigations should be taken into account when resulting from judicial or administrative procedures without prejudice to fundamental rights. The last but not least part should assess the notion of the independence of mind, which is applicable to all members of an institution's management body, and the principle of being independent required for the member's management body in its management or supervisory function. The independence of mind is what we already mentioned before and is actually the capability of the person and the willingness of the person to engage actively in their duties and also to make sound, objective and independent decisions and judgments of the facts presented to them. Being an independent member of the management body, on the other hand, means also you do not have any present or recent past relationships or links of any nature with the management that could have any sort of influence, either positive or negative, on your duties as a member of the management board. Another important topic, if we look at Title 4, is the HR training of the management body and the financial resources being provided for training and remuneration of the management body. As we already know, the members of the management body should have a clear understanding of the institution's structure, business model, risk profile, and governance arrangements. This can sometimes not be the case when we have members of a management body, which we will see in the next title, that are not originally coming from the banking and finance markets. So it should be ensured that there are enough resources to get members of a management body that have no professional background in this area up on track regarding the professional knowledge which they need to fulfill their role. What is also important and being stipulated in the guideline is that newly appointed members of the management body should receive all key information necessary for fulfilling their duties at the latest 1 month after taking up their position, and the induction of that person should be completed within 6 months. There should be policies within the institution covering all these topics, as well as what are the induction and training objectives, what are the responsibilities, what are the financial resources made available, and there should be a clear process for requesting induction or training by the management board members themselves. A very important topic these days is the diversity within the management body. All institutions should have and implement a policy promoting the diversity on the management body. Diversity means not only engaging a broad set of qualities and competencies, but also consider topics like the education, the professional background, the geographical provenance, the age, and the gender of the members of the management body. Significant institutions even need to specify a quantitative amount for the underrepresented gender in their management body within their policies. Title 6 gives us a few information about the suitability policy and governance arrangements that have to be established within an institution's organization, which means any institution's management, the management function as well as the supervisory function, needs to define, oversee, and is accountable for the implementation of all governance arrangements that ensure effective and prudent management. They have to have a suitability policy that is aligned with the institution's overall corporate governance framework, the corporate culture, and the risk appetite. This should be a group-wide policy, and the parts that should be included are the process for the selection, the appointment, the reappointment, the succession planning of members of the management body, and the applicable internal procedures for the assessment of the suitability of all those members, as well as criteria to be used in the assessment which should include the suitability criteria set out in these guidelines. What is also very important to be stipulated in these policies is how the communication channel with competent authorities should take place and how the assessment of members of the management body are documented. All changes to the suitability policy should, of course, also be approved by the management body. Now, talking a lot about the assessment of suitability of the members, we need to have a look at what is actually to be done when assessing the suitability. We have 4 different pillars that we can base our assessment on. The first is documents for assessing the suitability, which typically include recommendation letters, different diplomas and certificates of education, the CV, and of course interviews, not only with the existing management body, but in most countries also with the competent authorities. But of course also some sort of investigation on the background information available regarding the individual members is necessary. That could include, for example, reputation by looking at newspaper reports, or integrity, honesty, independence of mind, as far as it can be assessed from information that is available to the public. In any case, every member or potential new member of the management board should be required to verify that all the information he or she has provided in the process is accurate, and eventually provide proof and declare any actual and potential conflicts of interests that may arise for him. Of course, you cannot only rely on the information provided by the new member of the management board, but the respective committees, for example, the nomination committee, should evaluate all those information they get and validate or have validated the information that has been provided to them, and, where necessary, adopt corrective measures. For the assessment of the collective suitability of the management body, institutions should assess this suitability by using a suitability matrix template, which they may adapt, taking into account all the criteria described in these guidelines, as well as their own appropriate methodology that is in line with the criteria set out in these guidelines. So either way is possible. As already mentioned, the assessment of the individual and collective suitability is an ongoing process and has to be reassessed sometimes. So there should be an ongoing monitoring of the individual or collective suitability of the members of the management body. This should ensure the efficiency of the management body's working processes, the effective and prudent management of the institutions, the ability of the management body to focus on strategically important matters, as well as the adequacy of the structure of the management board in the supervisory as well as in the management function, and especially for the management body in the management function, also performance objectives set for the institution and the individual. The frequency of the periodic suitability reassessment differs between significant institutions, which should do it at least annually, and all other institutions, which should do it at least every 2 years. In the hopefully unlikely case that the reassessment of the individual or collective suitability has produced negative results, appropriate corrective measures should be taken, which may include, among others of course, adjusting responsibilities between the members of the management boards, or even replacing certain members, maybe bringing in new knowledge or experience by recruiting additional members, and measurements to mitigate existing conflicts of interests. Sometimes even the training of single members of the management body or the management body in its collective form could lead to a positive reassessment of the individual and collective suitability. We have finally come to an end of today's video. Thank you for watching. I really hope you could find some useful information in our wrap-up of the guidelines. Of course, we appreciate any comments you might have and any likes and shares in your social network. If you have any further questions regarding this guideline or any other regulatory topic, please do not hesitate to contact your local PwC office. They will, of course, be happy to support. All that remains for me now is to wish you a good day and looking forward to welcome you to our next video in this series. Bye-bye.